Persuasion by Jane Austen is about second chances and missed opportunities and a love that has now grown up. And for me, that made the novel even more heartbreaking and a lot more realistic than I think any other Jane Austen work that I've read. Persuasion is very delicate and subtle, like all Jane Austen novels, and it was just a really beautiful and easy book to read. What's so special about this book is that it is actually the reader who comments and almost imagines. So much is not said, so much is not on the page of Persuasion. And there are conversations, for example, within the family, and you know how Anne Elliot and Captain Wentworth would be feeling. You imagine how they might have looked at each other. That made it even more powerful because you understand these characters and their heartbreak so deeply that you can feel their pain and you really are actively involved in this story. In Persuasion, Anne Elliot is the kind of heroine of the story, and she is 27, so she is, in Austen time, officially on the shelf. But 8 years ago, she was persuaded to break off her engagement by a very kind of motherly figure, Lady Russell. So the Captain Wentworth, for that time, had very little prospects. And of course, then obviously marrying, it was more of a contract between families than a marriage of love. Both Anne Elliot and Captain Wentworth are heartbroken, and Captain Wentworth goes and is never seen until he returns 8 years later. I really liked Anne Elliot as a character because she never pities herself. She never went for second best either. She never married another man who proposed. She has almost got to this point where she is at peace with the fact that her love for Captain Wentworth exists and is still there, but will not happen. And the character of Captain Wentworth, when he does return, is so much of an enigma, and you never really know what he is feeling until a letter. Just read Persuasion just to get to this letter, because it is a lot more passionate and forward and incredibly raw and honest and truthful, and I would wait a million years to ever get a letter like that. Jane Austen is very famous for her characterizations and creating very ridiculous characters, and Persuasion is no exception. The Elliot family are completely ridiculous. Her father, Sir Walter, is very, very vain and kind of stupid, and so is her sister Elizabeth, and her other sister Mary is a hypochondriac. But the fact that we begin the novel with Sir Walter Elliot looking in a book which basically has all of the heirs and like a family tree almost, and he's basically looking for his entry, and that shows his vanity. And the fact that that's the only book he ever picks up just perfectly explains that character within the first page or even a paragraph. And that's what's so good about Jane Austen, that it's not just, it's not just a love story. She really provides a comic satire of the upper classes. Anne Elliot possesses everything that Jane Austen sees as a good kind of character. She is not dramatic, she is almost careful, she has morals. Anne Elliot just looks so sensible and level-headed, but then I think in comparison to her family, practically anybody would be more level-headed and more sensible than them. I really love the portrayal of men in this novel, because actually Sir Walter is not a stereotypical man, like he's not stereotypically masculine. In fact, I think you could even say that he is stereotypically feminine as a character. He is extremely, well, he has the characteristics that were often associated with women, of being vain into their looks and into their age. The Navy is that kind of masculinity. They are strong, they have fought in battle. And also the Navy that at the time when Jane Austen was writing was obviously a very big part of British society. They were seen as defenders of Britain, of British interests. They were seen as keeping up the monarchy and keeping up the institutions that in Jane Austen's time were very, very important. Actually, Jane Austen is quite patriotic in this novel, and she holds the Navy in very high esteem. But obviously there is also a strong contrast between not just the two ideals of masculinity, But this whole social class, Sir Walter Elliot, Anne's father, has inherited his money. But he is very traditional. He's a part of that kind of traditional aristocracy, or being a gentleman, like the traditional gentleman. Whereas all the members of the Navy, well, not all of them, but I think majority of them in this novel, have actually worked for their money and have gained their position through being in the Navy, which obviously is all about social mobility, and Jane Austen is actually really, really supportive of that, especially as Captain Wentworth, previously very little money and very little status, and obviously that's the reason Lady persuaded Anne to break off engagement, but he comes back with money and a position and a status that makes him worth knowing in the kind of the Elliot circle. Although Jane Austen is supportive of this kind of social mobility of people like of the naval officers, there are still limits, but ultimately she still has very kind of normal values and belief in the social kind of system and the social class system, I guess, because she's still very aware and very negative towards people like a character called Mrs. Clay, who wants to build up her status in society through marriage, and that is seen as overly ambitious and that she shouldn't be doing that, and is described as just a not very good character. I actually really liked the kind of the sense of equality that I got in this novel, especially between two of the characters in this novel, Admiral Croft and Mrs. Croft. They are Mrs. Croft is Captain Wentworth's sister, and together they have a very happy marriage, and there is an equality between them. They share the kind of the separate spheres of what a woman is supposed to be, what a man is supposed to be. For example, Mrs. Croft lives on the ships with her husband and is only happy when they are together, and the same way Admiral Croft helps the wife in things that were seen as kind of very feminine, like housework and chores and things like that. But the greatest equality did come in Captain Wentworth's letter. The letter basically is saying that a man and a woman, they love the same, that it is not any easier for a man to forget a love than it is for a woman. And there is a suspense through this novel, because even though I think when you read a Jane Austen you kind of know how it's going to end, but I just kept wanting to find out how these two people, how they would start speaking to each other. Jane Austen is so subtle, there is hardly a word. Everything matters in a Jane Austen novel, from looks, from discussions to other people, everything matters. And also because obviously at the time they're so restricted by these kind of the social norms, the social graces, that they couldn't just kind of go, "Hi, I still like you, marry me?" That sense of missed opportunity. If that makes the love story, makes their love even more powerful and more poignant. Jane Austen's message is that love brings happiness, and that ultimately any full, happy life needs love to exist.